The gates loomed over Claire, rusted and chained, casting long shadows across the overgrown path leading to St. Augustine Asylum. Its very name seemed to cling to the damp air, mingling with the decaying scent of dead leaves and rot. The building had been abandoned for decades, but even after all these years, the structure held a dark allure. She stood there staring at the crumbling stone, feeling as though something inside was watching her, waiting. As a photographer and amateur historian, Claire had always been drawn to places with stories buried in their walls, and St. Augustine had a reputation that was as grim as it was mysterious. She pulled out her camera, snapping a photo of the asylum's ominous entrance. The shutter clicked, capturing not just the image but something deeper, something darker. She took a deep breath and stepped inside, her footsteps echoing down the hollow corridors. Dust hung thick in the air, disturbed only by her movements. The walls, covered in peeling paint, seemed to whisper as she passed, as if they held on to the voices of those who had once been trapped here. Each room told a story, most of them hidden beneath layers of decay and shadow. She reached an old rusted door with a faded sign that read, "Treatment Room B." She pushed it open, and it creaked with a groan, revealing a chilling sight. Rows of restraining chairs, some still bearing the cracked leather straps that had once bound unwilling patients. The air was cold, colder than it should have been, and she shivered as she raised her camera. She aimed the lens at the chairs, taking a few steps back to capture the entire room. But just as she pressed the shutter, a whisper brushed against her ear. "Help me." Claire froze, her heart pounding. She spun around, her flashlight beam slicing through the darkness, but there was no one there. She let out a shaky breath, trying to convince herself that it had only been her imagination. She had been in abandoned buildings before. She knew how they could play tricks on you. Still, a chill ran down her spine, and her instincts screamed that she was not alone. Her mind raced with the rumors she'd heard about the asylum's last head doctor, Dr. Alistair Crane. Known for his unorthodox and often cruel treatments, he had a reputation for pushing his patients to the brink of madness. His cures were whispered about in hushed tones, stories of locked doors, soundproof rooms, and agonizing isolation. Some said that Crane had dabbled in the occult, believing he could rid his patients of their demons by transferring their suffering into the walls themselves. Determined to find answers, Claire ventured deeper into the building, moving through the maze-like corridors. The deeper she went, the stronger the feeling of unease grew. The whispers became louder, not quite words but fragments of fear and sorrow. At the end of a dark hallway, she spotted a flicker of movement, a shadow slipping around the corner. She quickened her pace, adrenaline spiking as she chased the figure down twisting corridors, through forgotten rooms and stairwells. Her flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls, but she refused to stop. She had to know who, or what, was haunting this place. Finally, she entered a large, decaying room with high ceilings and shattered windows that allowed shafts of moonlight to pierce through. And there, at the far end of the room, stood a figure, a man in a long, dark coat with hollow eyes that seemed to peer into her soul. His lips twisted into a grotesque smile, and Claire knew, with a sickening certainty, that this was Dr. Alistair Crane. Before she could scream, the whispers turned into screams, filling her ears and drowning out her own panicked breaths. The walls seemed to close in on her, pressing closer, suffocating her with the weight of countless souls trapped within. She stumbled backward, her vision blurring as the air thickened, turning icy cold. "Join us," Crane's voice echoed as his figure moved toward her, each step slow and deliberate. His eyes filled with something dark and insidious. Claire turned and ran, her heart pounding as the walls seemed to bend and twist, leading her deeper into the asylum's depths. She burst into a room she didn't recognize, filled with skeletal remains of broken restraints and rusted medical instruments. The room felt heavy, like the very air was thick with despair. She looked around, gasping for breath, and spotted a journal lying on a decrepit desk in the corner. With shaking hands, she flipped it open, scanning the faded pages. The handwriting was frantic, filled with disjointed notes and sketches, each page detailing Dr. Crane's twisted belief that he could capture suffering and bind it within these walls. His final entry read, "The walls are hungry. They must be fed." and the only way out is through sacrifice. The whispers crescendoed into wails as Claire realized the truth. She was trapped, just as those before her had been, another soul to feed the walls of St. Augustine Asylum. The shadows around her twisted, and Claire felt herself being pulled into the darkness, her screams lost among the echoes of the damned. Claire felt herself drawn into the twisted words on the page, her hands shaking as she clutched the brittle journal. Every word echoed with the madness of Dr. Crane, whose obsession with suffering had bled into the walls of the asylum, leaving a stain that could never be washed away. She felt the chill intensify around her, as if the walls themselves were leaning closer, listening, waiting. The journal described how Crane had believed that the human mind could be purified through pain. To him, suffering was a force, one that could be harnessed, controlled, and worst of all, transferred. Patients were bound in rooms where their screams were absorbed into the walls, layer by layer, until the walls themselves became conduits of their agony. Claire's pulse quickened as she read on. The whispers Crane had scrawled in his uneven handwriting are evidence that the process has succeeded. The darkness within them, their fears, their horrors, now live within these walls, giving the asylum a life of its own. A loud thud broke her focus, and she looked up, her heart pounding. The shadows in the corners seemed to flicker, shifting closer with each beat of silence. She could feel them watching her, could hear the faintest hint of breathing echoing in the stillness. She took a step back, clutching her camera tightly. As she turned to leave, the door slammed shut with a force that echoed through the empty hallways. She rushed to the door, pulling on the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Panic settled in her chest, cold and suffocating. She turned around, only to find herself face to face with a figure in the shadows. It was Dr. Crane. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow yet filled with a hunger that defied any human expression. His voice was a hoarse whisper, barely audible above the creaks and groans of the old building. "Did you think you could come here and leave?" Claire backed away, but the walls seemed to close in on her, the whispering growing louder, almost deafening. She could make out words now, fragments of sentences and voices filled with despair and terror. They were calling to her, reaching for her, their spectral hands brushing against her skin, chilling her to the bone. "Your suffering will feed the walls," Crane continued, his voice cold and detached, as though he were explaining a simple truth. "The walls are hungry, Claire. They need you." Desperate, Claire searched for any possible escape. She spotted a narrow window in the corner of the room, partially obscured by layers of grime and dust. She dashed toward it, her movements frantic as she scraped away the dirt with her sleeve, hoping for even a sliver of light, a sign that there was still a way out. But as she looked through the glass, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Outside, where the grounds of the asylum should have been, was a reflection of the room she was standing in. The walls, the shadows, the lurking figure of Dr. Crane. They were all there, mirrored perfectly, yet twisted darker. The Claire in the reflection stood frozen in terror, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. She reached out, and her reflection did the same, their fingers nearly touching the glass. Suddenly she felt a pull, a force dragging her closer to the window. She tried to resist, but it was as if the asylum itself was drawing her in, pulling her toward the other side. She stumbled backward, her mind racing, her breathing coming in shallow, rapid gasps. Every instinct told her to run, but there was nowhere to go. The asylum had her, and wasn't letting go. In a last, desperate attempt, Claire clutched the camera around her neck. She lifted it, aiming at the ghostly figure of Dr. Crane. Her hands shook as she snapped a photo, the flash illuminating the room in a blinding burst of light. For a brief moment, the whispers stopped, the shadows receded, and the figure of Dr. Crane flickered, his face twisted in an expression of rage and horror. The light faded, and she was alone once more. The door creaked open, as if the asylum itself were offering her a chance to escape. Without a second thought, she sprinted through the door, down the hallway, her footsteps echoing in the darkness. The whispers began to rise again, following her, but she didn't stop. She ran through the twisting corridors, her pulse racing as she navigated the maze-like structure. Just as she reached the main hall, she felt an icy hand close around her wrist, stopping her in her tracks. She turned to see the spectral faces of the asylum's former patients, their eyes hollow, their mouths open in silent screams. They surrounded her, their pale forms blending with the shadows, trapping her in their midst. One of the figures, a young woman with wide, empty eyes, leaned close, her voice a faint whisper in Claire's ear. "He won't let you leave. No one ever leaves." In a final act of defiance, Claire raised her camera one last time, aiming it at the ghosts surrounding her. She pressed the shutter, flooding the room with light. The spirits shrieked, their forms dissipating in the brilliance, and the grip on her wrist loosened. She stumbled forward, her vision blurred, her limbs heavy with exhaustion. The front doors loomed ahead, and she lunged toward them, her breath ragged, her heart pounding. She pushed them open, stumbling into the cold night air, collapsing onto the damp ground outside. She looked back, half expecting to see Dr. Crane and his ghosts watching her from the doorway. But the asylum was silent once more, its dark windows staring blankly into the night. Claire escaped, but as she rose to her feet, her camera hanging heavily around her neck, she knew that something had followed her. The asylum had left its mark on her, its whispers etched into her mind, echoing in the silence. As she walked away from the building, the faintest whisper brushed against her ear. "Come back." As Claire trudged away from St. Augustine Asylum, the whispers continued, faint and persistent, lingering just at the edge of her awareness. Every footstep felt heavy. Every gust of wind seemed to carry faint voices, trailing after her like phantoms she couldn't shake. She looked down at her camera, still hanging from her neck, and felt a strange sense of dread. In the quiet of her car, the world seemed to finally fall silent. She stared at the asylum's imposing silhouette one last time, half expecting to see figures watching her from the windows. But the building was as still as death. Claire took a deep breath and finally turned her car on, letting the rumble of the engine break the silence. Back at her apartment, she set the camera on her desk, unable to shake the sensation that it was watching her, almost as if it held something within its frame. She sat down and connected it to her laptop, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She took a deep breath and opened the folder containing the photos she had taken that night. One by one, the images appeared on her screen, each frame shrouded in darkness and shadow. Some were blurred, others overexposed, capturing only fragments of the asylum's haunting interior. But then, one image stopped her cold. It was a photo of the treatment room she had entered, the rows of empty chairs casting long, eerie shadows. And there, standing in the corner, was a figure. Pale, translucent, with hollow eyes that seemed to stare directly at her through the screen. Claire's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't seen anyone in that room when she took the photo. She zoomed in, her hands shaking, as the figure's details came into focus. It was unmistakably Dr. Crane, his face twisted into a grim, malevolent smile. She gasped, pulling away from the screen as a wave of nausea washed over her. She closed her laptop, her heart racing, but the image of Crane's haunting gaze was burned into her mind. The whispers started again that night. At first, they were faint, just a murmur at the edge of her hearing. But as the hours passed, they grew louder, more insistent, filling her mind with fragmented words and ghostly cries. She covered her ears, but it was no use. The voices were inside her, echoing through her thoughts, calling her back to the asylum. Sleep became impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Dr. Crane's face, his hollow eyes staring into her soul. Days turned into sleepless nights, and soon, Claire began to feel the weight of the asylum pressing down on her, even in her own home. The walls seemed to close in, shadows creeping along the edges of her vision. She knew it was only a matter of time before the asylum called her back. One night, the whispers grew louder than ever, filling her apartment with a cacophony of ghostly voices. She clutched her head, trying to block them out, but they only grew more insistent, repeating the same words over and over. "Come back, come back, come back." Unable to bear it any longer, Claire grabbed her keys and stumbled out of her apartment, her mind numb with fear and exhaustion. She knew what she had to do. She had to go back to St. Augustine Asylum, to face whatever horror waited for her there, to finally put an end to the whispers that had taken over her life. As she drove through the empty streets, the asylum loomed ahead, its dark silhouette standing against the night sky like a beacon of despair. Claire felt the pull of the building, stronger than ever, drawing her in. promising her peace if she only surrendered to its depths. She parked her car at the gates, the silence oppressive as she stepped out and approached the entrance. The doors creaked open as if they had been waiting for her, and Claire took a deep breath, steeling herself as she crossed the threshold. The asylum was just as she had left it, dark and empty, the air thick with an unnatural chill. She made her way down the familiar hallways, her footsteps echoing in the silence, her flashlight casting eerie shadows along the peeling walls. The whispers surrounded her, guiding her deeper into the building, pulling her toward a room she hadn't seen before. The door to the room stood open, and as Claire stepped inside, she felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The walls were covered in writing, dark, scrawled messages that twisted and overlapped, covering every inch of the decaying plaster. She recognized the handwriting instantly. It was her own. She stumbled back, her mind reeling as she tried to make sense of what she was seeing. But before she could process it, a cold hand closed around her shoulder, and she spun around, coming face to face with Dr. Crane. His hollow eyes bore into hers, his expression filled with a twisted satisfaction. "Welcome back," he whispered, his voice echoing through the room. The walls closed in around her, and Claire felt herself slipping away, the last remnants of her sanity swallowed by the darkness of the asylum. The whispers consumed her, filling her mind with endless cries of despair, until she became just another voice in the chorus of the damned. And in the silence that followed, the asylum stood empty once more, waiting patiently for its next visitor. Claire could feel her grip on reality slipping, her mind consumed by the weight of the whispers, the endless voices filling every corner of her consciousness. She was no longer just Claire. She was one with the asylum, a conduit for the tortured souls trapped within its walls. The walls themselves seemed to pulse, as if alive, drawing her deeper into their dark embrace. Her flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows across the room, and she caught glimpses of faces in the peeling paint, faces of the lost souls who had been consumed by the asylum's darkness. Their hollow eyes stared at her, pleading, accusing, their mouths open, silent screams. And then she saw him, Dr. Crane, his figure as dark and menacing as ever, standing at the far end of the room. His gaze bore into hers, filled with a twisted satisfaction, as if he had been waiting for this moment all along. He raised a hand, beckoning her forward, his lips curling into a cruel smile. "You belong to us now," he whispered, his voice echoing through the room like a death sentence. "There is no escape from St. Augustine." Claire tried to scream, but her voice was lost in the cacophony of whispers, swallowed by the asylum's insatiable hunger. She could feel her identity slipping away, her memories fading as the asylum claimed her, body and soul. But just as she was about to give in, a flash of light burst through the darkness, illuminating the room in a blinding brilliance. Claire shielded her eyes, her mind struggling to make sense of what was happening. Through the haze, she saw a figure standing in the doorway, bathed in the light. It was a man, his face familiar yet strange, his expression filled with determination and sorrow. Claire realized with a shock that it was her grandfather, the man who had introduced her to the world of photography, who had taught her to see beauty in darkness. He stepped forward, his gaze fixed on her, his voice calm and steady. "Claire, you have to fight. You have to remember who you are." The light around him grew brighter, pushing back the shadows, and Claire felt a surge of strength she hadn't felt in days. She focused on her grandfather's face, clinging to the memory of his kindness, his wisdom, his love. The whispers began to fade, the darkness receding as her sense of self returned, stronger than before. Dr. Crane's expression twisted in fury, his figure wavering, as if the light was tearing him apart. He reached out, his hand clawing at the air, but it was too late. The light had broken his hold on her, severing the asylum's connection to her mind. With a final piercing scream, Crane's figure dissolved into nothingness, leaving only silence in his wake. Claire collapsed to the floor, her body trembling as the last remnants of the asylum's darkness faded away. She looked up, expecting to see her grandfather, but he was gone, his presence nothing more than a memory. But she knew that he had saved her, had pulled her back from the brink, and she vowed never to forget his gift. Slowly, she rose to her feet, her mind clear, her heart filled with a renewed sense of purpose. She turned and walked out of the room, leaving the whispers, the shadows, and the ghosts of St. Augustine behind. As she stepped into the morning light, she took one last look at the asylum, feeling a strange sense of peace. The building stood silent and empty, its power broken, its hunger sated, and Claire knew that she was free. Days passed, but Claire couldn't shake the experience at St. Augustine Asylum. Even though she had left its haunted walls behind, the memories remained vivid, lingering like dark clouds in her mind. She returned to her normal routine, but her nights were plagued with nightmares. Visions of Dr. Crane, of the asylum's shadowed halls, and the voices always whispering just at the edge of hearing. Despite her desire to leave the entire ordeal in the past, a strange compulsion kept pulling her toward her camera. She hadn't reviewed the photos again since that first night, but she knew that something still lingered within those frames, as if fragments of the asylum's darkness had been captured alongside the images. One evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, Claire sat down at her desk, taking a deep breath as she connected her camera to her computer once more. The screen lit up, displaying the folder of photos she had taken during her investigation. Her hands trembled as she opened the first image. The photograph showed one of the asylum's long, empty corridors, dimly lit by her flashlight. But in the corner of the frame, she noticed something new, an outline, faint and shadowy, as if someone had been standing there, watching her. She clicked to the next image, her pulse quickening as she examined each detail. In every photo, there were subtle, almost imperceptible shapes lurking in the shadows, faces, figures, traces of something otherworldly. It was as if the asylum's spirits had followed her, leaving fragments of themselves in her camera, waiting to be seen. And then she reached the last photo, the one she had taken in the treatment room, just before Dr. Crane had appeared. Her breath caught in her throat as she stared at the image, her heart pounding. In the center of the photo, standing against the wall, was Dr. Crane. His figure was translucent, his eyes hollow and filled with a hatred that sent shivers down her spine. But this time, he wasn't alone. Behind him, a crowd of shadowy figures filled the room, their faces twisted in silent agony. The patients, the ones who had suffered under Crane's experiments, they were there, their spirits bound to the asylum, trapped within its walls for eternity. And now they were reaching out, their spectral hands extending toward the camera, as if pleading for release. Claire's hands shook as she closed the photo, her mind racing. The asylum hadn't let her go. It had merely given her a piece of itself, a dark reminder of the horrors that lay within. She could feel its presence, the cold chill of its whispers echoing in her mind, calling her back. A chill ran down her spine as a thought occurred to her, a terrifying realization that left her frozen in place. She hadn't escaped St. Augustine Asylum. The asylum had come with her. The following nights only grew worse for Claire. Each evening, as darkness settled over her apartment, she felt the shadows closing in. She could hear faint echoes, like whispers, seeping from the walls, reverberating in the silence. The voices were familiar now, some pleading, others angry, as though the spirits of St. Augustine had followed her home. Claire's every attempt to ignore them only intensified their presence. Determined to rid herself of the asylum's curse, she began researching ways to release lingering spirits. Every lay led to the same conclusion. She would have to confront the ghosts and put them to rest. The idea chilled her, but the relentless whispers left her no choice. One evening, Claire set up her camera, turning on the video recording as she spoke to the emptiness around her. "To the spirits of St. Augustine," she began, her voice shaky. "I didn't mean to disturb you. If you're here, if you're trapped, please show me what you need." The room fell silent. She held her breath, the air thick with anticipation. And then, slowly, the temperature dropped, filling the room with a bone-chilling cold. Her breath fogged in front of her as shadows began to shift, coalescing into shapes around her. Figures began to form, patients, their faces hollow and etched with pain. At the center of them all was Dr. Crane, his eyes fixed on Claire, his mouth twisted in a cruel, satisfied smile. Claire's heart raced as she faced him. "Why are you doing this?" she demanded, her voice trembling. Dr. Crane took a step forward, his gaze dark and unyielding. "You are their witness now," he whispered, his voice laced with malice. You carry their pain. Their suffering lives within you. Desperation clawed at her as she looked at the patients surrounding Crane. Their eyes, once lifeless, now seemed to implore her, as if begging for salvation. She took a deep breath, summoning every ounce of courage within her. If you want peace, I will find a way to help you. But you must let me go. Dr. Crane's figure flickered, his form wavering, but he gave no response. Instead, the other spirits stepped forward, their faces softening, the agony in their eyes replaced with something almost hopeful. They reached out, and Claire felt a surge of warmth pass through her, as though they were thanking her, entrusting her with their release. In that moment, the whispers ceased, the room growing silent as each spirit faded, disappearing into the shadows. Only Dr. Crane remained, his expression twisted with fury. You cannot free them, he snarled. Their pain binds them, and you to me. But even as he spoke, his figure began to waver, his hold on her slipping as the presence of the other spirits strengthened her resolve. With a final surge of willpower, Claire stepped forward, her voice firm. Your time is over. They are free, and so am I. Dr. Crane's form shattered, dissolving into darkness as his scream echoed through the room. The chill lifted, the shadows receded, and Claire felt a weight lift from her chest. She was alone again, the silence peaceful and still. As she watched the recording, she saw only herself speaking into the darkness, her words echoing through the empty room. But she knew, deep within her, that the spirits had found their release. The days that followed were peaceful for the first time in what felt like ages. Claire's apartment was quiet, free from the relentless whispers and shadows that had plagued her. She began to return to her routines, feeling lighter, as though a great weight had been lifted. The memory of St. Augustine faded into the background, becoming a distant nightmare she was finally beginning to leave behind. But one night, as she prepared for bed, her camera unexpectedly turned on by itself, the light flashing in the darkness. A wave of dread settled over her as she stared at the camera, its lens focused on her as if something, or someone, was watching. Claire hesitated, then walked over to check the device. She scrolled through the recent photos, relieved to see only her own face staring back at her. But when she reached the last image, her heart nearly stopped. The photo was of her empty bedroom, but in the background, barely visible in the shadows, was the unmistakable outline of Dr. Crane. His face was twisted into a cruel smile, his eyes filled with a dark, unquenchable hunger. Claire's hands shook as she looked at the image, the cold certainty settling over her that his spirit hadn't been banished. Dr. Crane's voice whispered through her mind, faint but chilling. I'm bound to you, Claire. You set them free, but my curse remains. Terror seized her as the shadows in her room deepened, a faint cold settling in once more. She realized then that Dr. Crane was not just a spirit tied to the asylum. His darkness had become part of her, an unbreakable bond forged in that final confrontation. No matter where she went, his presence would remain, lurking in the shadows, a constant reminder of the horrors she had witnessed. Claire took a deep breath, her mind racing. She understood that her escape from St. Augustine had come at a cost. While she had freed the souls of the patients, she had unwittingly allowed Crane's spirit to latch onto her, a new prison for his malevolence. She resolved that she couldn't let his darkness consume her life. She would have to find a way to sever the bond, to confront Crane's spirit one last time, and put an end to his curse for good. But for now, she knew one thing with chilling certainty. The nightmare was far from over. Determined to free herself from Dr. Crane's lingering presence, Claire began researching the methods of spiritual cleansing. She buried herself in books about paranormal activity and historical hauntings, searching for a way to sever the bond that tied her to the malevolent doctor. Her apartment, once a sanctuary, had become a battleground for her sanity, the air thick with an oppressive energy. One evening, she stumbled across a book in an obscure online shop titled The Art of Banishing Spirits. It contained instructions on various rituals that could be performed to expel unwanted entities. Among them was a ritual involving salt, herbs, and the power of intention, a method that promised to cleanse spaces of lingering darkness. Feeling a flicker of hope, Claire ordered the book and gathered the necessary supplies. When it arrived, She spent hours poring over its pages, learning about the importance of setting intentions and visualizing the expulsion of negative energy. The more she read, the more determined she became to reclaim her life. The night of the ritual arrived, and Claire felt a mix of anxiety and resolve as she prepared her apartment. She sprinkled salt around the perimeter of her living room, creating a barrier of protection, and set up candles in each corner. The flickering flames cast dancing shadows across the walls, reminding her of the asylum's haunting atmosphere. As she sat in the center of the room, she closed her eyes and focused her thoughts. She envisioned a bright light enveloping her, pushing away the darkness that had claimed a part of her. "Dr. Crane," she called out, her voice steady despite the fear that gripped her. "I release you. You have no power over me." The temperature in the room plummeted, and Claire felt a presence press against her, cold and suffocating. She opened her eyes to see a shadow forming at the edge of the salt barrier. Dr. Crane's figure emerging from the darkness, his face twisted in rage, his hollow eyes glinting with malice. "You cannot escape me, Claire," he shouted, his voice echoing with a dreadful authority. But Claire stood her ground, drawing strength from the words she had studied. "I reject your influence. I claim my life back." With each word, she envisioned the light growing stronger, pushing back against the darkness. Dr. Crane lunged forward, but as he crossed the salt line, he stopped, a look of confusion washing over his face. Claire seized the moment, raising her arms and shouting, "I command you to leave. You have no place here." The room erupted into chaos. The candles flickered violently, the shadows roiling as if caught in a storm. Claire could feel the power of the ritual surging around her, a bright light illuminating the darkness. She focused on the light, sending it toward Dr. Crane, who recoiled as it approached. With one final push, she released all her fear and anger into the light, a wave of energy that crashed into Crane, engulfing him. His scream pierced the air, a chilling sound filled with rage and despair. "You will regret this," he shouted as the light enveloped him, and with a blinding flash, he vanished. The room fell silent. The oppressive weight that had clung to Claire lifted, replaced by a profound stillness. She took a shaky breath, her heart racing, and felt an overwhelming sense of relief wash over her. She had done it. She had faced her fears and confronted the darkness. Exhausted but exhilarated, Claire looked around her apartment. The air felt lighter, the shadows receding to the corners of the room. The whispers were gone, replaced by the soft sound of her own breath. For the first time in weeks, she felt free. As she cleaned up the remnants of the ritual, Claire knew that she had not only reclaimed her space, but had also found a new strength within herself. She had faced her darkest fears and emerged victorious. But deep down, she understood that the echoes of St. Augustine would always remain a part of her, a reminder of her journey through darkness and into the light. Yet, as she turned off the lights and prepared for bed, she felt a flicker of doubt. Had she truly banished Dr. Crane, or was he merely waiting, biding his time, hidden in the recesses of her mind? That night, as Claire drifted off to sleep, she couldn't shake the feeling that her battle was far from over. In the quiet of her dreams, the darkness stirred once more, hinting at a story still waiting to unfold. Days turned into weeks, and while the oppressive weight of Dr. Crane's spirit had lifted, Claire found herself haunted by a sense of unease. She had faced the darkness, but the victory felt incomplete, like a puzzle with missing pieces. The echoes of St. Augustine still reverberated in her mind, and at night she often found herself waking in a cold sweat, feeling as if unseen eyes were watching her. One evening, while organizing her notes and photographs from her time at the asylum, she stumbled across an old newspaper clipping tucked between the pages of her journal. It detailed the asylum's history, recounting the experiments Dr. Crane had conducted and the subsequent accusations of malpractice. What caught her attention was a photograph of a group of patients, one of whom bore a striking resemblance to her. Same dark hair, same haunting eyes. The article mentioned that this particular patient had mysteriously disappeared, rumored to be one of Crane's first victims. Confusion washed over her. Could it be that this woman, whose name was Annabelle, had a connection to her own life? A shiver ran down her spine as Claire felt a deeper, unshakable bond forming between herself and the asylum's tragic past. If Crane had been able to cling to her soul, what other ties might she have to those lost within the asylum's walls? Determined to uncover the truth, Claire returned to her research. She spent hours digging into archives and online databases, searching for anything related to Annabelle and her fate. Each revelation added weight to the chilling connection she felt. Annabelle had been a promising artist, known for her vivid paintings that captured the essence of life within the asylum. But with each brushstroke, the darkness of her experiences seeped through, culminating in a final, disturbing piece that left her colleagues unsettled. Compelled by an insatiable curiosity, Claire sought out Annabelle's paintings, hoping to discover more about the woman who shared her likeness. After a week of relentless searching, she found a gallery exhibiting works by artists who had been institutionalized. Among the pieces displayed was one of Annabelle's last works, a chaotic canvas splashed with deep reds and blacks, a wild swirl of emotion that seemed to reach out to Claire. In the corner of the painting, Claire noticed a small figure that resembled Dr. Crane, lurking in the shadows, watching. The gallery curator noticed Claire's fascination and approached her. "It's quite a powerful piece, isn't it?" she said, her voice low and reverent. Many believe that Annabelle was channeling her trauma into her art. They say that those who view it often feel a connection to her spirit, almost as if she's still trapped in the painting. Claire felt her heart race. "Trapped?" she echoed, realizing the implications. If Annabelle's spirit was indeed tied to her last artwork, then perhaps she could find a way to reach out, to connect with the woman and understand her fate, and perhaps even help set her free, just as she had done with the other spirits. That night, Claire returned home, her mind swirling with thoughts of the painting. She decided to visit the gallery again, determined to gather more information about Annabelle's life. As she prepared for bed, she noticed the familiar chill returning to her apartment, the shadows creeping in once more. But this time, she felt something different, a pull, a whisper that seemed to beckon her toward the painting. "I needed to see it again," Claire murmured to herself, her resolve hardening. "I need to understand." The next day, she arrived at the gallery just as it opened, her heart pounding with anticipation. She walked straight to Annabelle's painting, standing before it in awe. The brushstrokes seemed to pulse with emotion, and as she studied it, she could almost hear the echoes of the past whispering through the canvas. "Annabelle," Claire whispered, reaching out a tentative hand toward the painting. "If you're here, if you can hear me, please show me your truth." As she stood there, something extraordinary happened. The colors began to shift, swirling together as if alive, and Claire felt a rush of energy envelop her. The room around her faded away, and she was pulled into the depths of the painting, where shadows danced and light flickered. Suddenly, she was standing in a dark, misty landscape that felt both familiar and otherworldly. In front of her, a figure emerged, a woman with the same haunting eyes and dark hair as Claire. It was Annabelle, her expression a mixture of sadness and relief. "Help me," Annabelle whispered, her voice echoing in the haze. "You must help me confront him." In that moment, Claire understood. The bond she felt with Annabelle was not merely a coincidence, it was a calling. Together, they would face the darkness that had bound them both to Dr. Crane and to the asylum. With determination, Claire stepped forward, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The world around Claire shimmered with a spectral light as she stood face to face with Annabelle. The dark landscape felt charged with tension, the air thick with unspoken emotions. "You came," Annabelle whispered, her eyes shimmering with hope. "I've waited so long." "I couldn't ignore your call," Claire replied, her voice steady despite the fear creeping into her chest. "We're connected somehow, and I want to help you, but we have to confront Dr. Crane together." Annabelle nodded, her expression grave. "He holds our souls captive, using our pain to feed his darkness. If we can confront him, maybe we can finally be free." With Annabelle by her side, Claire began to walk through the shifting mist. Shadows twisted around them, but together they felt a growing strength. As they moved forward, Claire could sense Dr. Crane's presence, an oppressive energy that wrapped around her like a suffocating blanket. Suddenly, the landscape morphed, and they found themselves in the asylum's treatment room, the very place where Claire had first encountered Dr. Crane. The atmosphere crackled with tension as the figure of the doctor materialized before them, his malevolent smile sending chills down Claire's spine. "You dare to return?" Dr. Crane's voice boomed, echoing through the chamber. "You think you can escape me? You belong to me now." Claire stepped forward, heart pounding, the warmth of Annabelle's presence bolstering her courage. "No, we are not yours to control," she shouted, her voice firm. "Your time is over, Crane. You can't hold us captive any longer." Dr. Crane's expression twisted in anger as he stepped closer, his dark aura swirling menacingly. "You're just a fleeting memory, a ghost of what once was. You cannot defeat me. I am eternal." As he reached out, a rush of icy wind swept through the room, pushing Claire and Annabelle back. But Claire refused to yield. "We are not alone. We carry the strength of all the lives you've destroyed." Annabelle stepped forward, her own voice ringing with newfound power. "You may have taken our lives, but you will not take our spirits. We will fight back." Together, Claire and Annabelle focused their energy, visualizing the light that had enveloped them before. They conjured it from within, a brilliant force fueled by their shared pain and desire for freedom. The light erupted around them, illuminating the dark room, pushing against Dr. Crane's shadowy form. "No!" he roared, his body beginning to flicker as the light grew stronger. "You cannot." But Claire and Annabelle pressed on, chanting words they had learned from the book. A powerful incantation that called upon the strength of the spirits trapped in the asylum. The light surged, enveloping Crane and illuminating the depths of his darkness. In that moment, Claire felt the presence of the other spirits, those who had suffered at the hands of Crane, joining their strength with hers and Annabelle's. Their cries for justice mingled with the powerful incantation, forming a chorus of determination that echoed through the treatment room. As the light reached its peak, Dr. Crane's figure twisted in agony, his scream reverberating through the air. "You cannot do this," he shrieked, his shadowy form beginning to dissolve. "I will not be forgotten." But it was too late. The combined force of their spirits shattered the darkness surrounding him, breaking the hold he had over them. With one final blinding flash, Dr. Crane disappeared, his presence banished forever. The room fell silent, the oppressive atmosphere lifting as light flooded in. Claire felt a rush of warmth envelop her, the spirits of the asylum finally free. She turned to Annabelle, their eyes locking in a moment of shared understanding. "We did it," Claire whispered, tears of relief streaming down her face. "We're free." Annabelle smiled, a radiant light filling her features. "Thank you for believing in me, for helping me find my voice again. We are finally at peace." As the mists began to clear, Claire felt a pull, a gentle tug guiding her back to her world. With one last look at Annabelle, she knew she would carry the memory of their connection, a bond forged through shared pain and strength. Claire awoke in her apartment, the morning sun streaming through the window, casting a warm glow over the room. She blinked, disoriented but filled with a profound sense of peace. The shadows that had once clung to her were gone, replaced by the gentle light of a new day. She sat up, her heart swelling with hope. The connection she had felt to Annabelle was still there, an invisible thread linking them together, but now it felt like a memory rather than a weight. Claire could finally breathe freely, unburdened by the shadows of St. Augustine. With a renewed sense of purpose, Claire picked up her camera and began to document her thoughts, capturing the beauty around her, the light, the life, and the promise of new beginnings. She knew that while the memories of the asylum would always linger, they no longer defined her. Instead, they had become a part of her story, a chapter in a journey of healing and resilience. As she reviewed her photographs from the asylum, she noticed something remarkable. The last image of Annabelle's painting, captured in the moment before her confrontation with Crane, now glowed with a vibrant light. The shadows that had once loomed over it had faded, revealing the beauty that had been hidden beneath the darkness. Claire smiled, feeling a sense of closure wash over her. She would share her story, not just of the horrors she had encountered, but of the hope that emerged from the darkness. The spirits of St. Augustine had found their peace, and now it was time for her to embrace her own. With the sunlight pouring into her apartment, Claire felt the warmth seep into her bones, invigorating her spirit. The victory over Dr. Crane and the release of Annabelle's spirit had ignited a fire within her. She knew that this experience had changed her forever, transforming her from a passive observer of horror into an active participant in her own narrative. Determined to share her story and the stories of those who had been trapped, Claire began writing. She poured her heart and soul into a manuscript that would blend her personal journey with the haunting histories of the asylum. She wanted to honor the spirits, especially Annabelle, who had guided her through the darkness. As she wrote, Claire sought out local book clubs and community centers to share her findings. Each meeting became a gathering where people could connect over their shared experiences with fear and hope. The tales of the asylum morphed into cautionary stories, cautioning against the dangers of neglect and abuse, but also emphasizing the power of resilience and healing. Claire also started volunteering at a local mental health organization, where she listened to others share their struggles. She found that her own experiences helped her connect with those around her. She learned that fear could be a powerful force, but it could also be transformed into strength. By sharing her journey, she encouraged others to confront their own shadows, helping them to find their voices amidst their struggles. Despite the newfound light in her life, Claire occasionally felt the chill of memories creeping back. On particularly quiet nights, she could sense the whisper of Dr. Crane lurking at the edges of her thoughts. But rather than succumbing to fear, she embraced those moments as reminders of her strength. They were signals that she had faced darkness before and could do so again if necessary. One evening, as she prepared for a reading at the community center, she felt an unusual tingle in the air. It was electric, a familiar sensation that made her skin prickle. Taking a deep breath, she reminded herself that she had the power to command her space, just as she had during the banishment ritual. The reading went well, and Claire found herself surrounded by a supportive audience. As she shared her story, she felt a connection to the people in the room, each person hanging on to her words, understanding the struggle against the shadows they carried. As she finished, she received a warm round of applause, but amid the cheers, a single voice broke through. A woman in the back who stood with tears in her eyes. "Thank you for sharing this. I thought I was alone in my fear." Claire's heart swelled with gratitude. This was the purpose she had sought. "You're never alone," she replied, her voice firm. "There's strength in sharing our stories and confronting our fears together." After the event, Claire approached the woman whose name was Lydia. They spoke for hours, sharing their experiences and fears, discovering common threads in their stories. Lydia had also faced her own dark memories and had been searching for a way to reclaim her life. Together, they began to forge a friendship built on understanding and mutual support. That night, as Claire lay in bed, she felt a sense of completeness that she had never known before. The shadows that had once loomed over her felt distant, replaced by a network of connections, friends who understood her struggles, a community that supported each other through fear and hope. As she closed her eyes, the soft glow of a lamp illuminating her room, she felt a whisper of a breeze, a gentle reminder of Annabelle. "You're not alone, Claire," the voice seemed to say, filled with warmth. "Keep sharing our stories." With that comforting thought, Claire drifted into a deep sleep, dreaming of a world where darkness was met with light, and where every story, no matter how terrifying, could lead to healing and hope. As the weeks passed, Claire's connection with Lydia blossomed into a profound friendship. They found comfort in each other's company, sharing not only their fears, but also their dreams of creating a supportive community for those affected by trauma and mental health challenges. With a shared vision, they decided to launch a series of workshops aimed at helping others confront their fears through storytelling and art. The first workshop was held in the community center, where they decorated the space with vibrant colors, aiming to foster a warm, inviting atmosphere. Claire shared her journey of healing and invited participants to express their own experiences through writing or art. Lydia introduced a section focused on mindfulness, guiding everyone through calming techniques that help them ground themselves and find strength in vulnerability. On the day of the workshop, a diverse group of people gathered. Some were local artists, others were parents seeking to share their stories, and a few were individuals battling their demons alone. Claire felt a mix of excitement and anxiety, but as the workshop began, the energy in the room shifted. Participants shared laughter, tears, and powerful stories, creating an atmosphere of shared understanding and support. Claire facilitated an exercise where participants wrote letters to their past selves, expressing their fears and the strength they had gained. As she watched them pour their hearts onto paper, she realized the impact of her journey. It wasn't just her story anymore. It was a collective experience that had the power to heal. After the first workshop, Claire and Lydia received an outpouring of gratitude from participants. Many expressed how empowering it felt to share their stories and connect with others who understood their pain. Encouraged by this success, they planned a series of workshops, each focusing on different themes: resilience, self-acceptance, and the importance of community. As their initiative gained momentum, Claire felt a growing sense of responsibility. She began documenting the stories shared during the workshops, intending to compile them into a book. Her goal was to create a platform for voices that had often been silenced by fear. It became a labor of love, a way to honor the spirits she had encountered and the lives they had touched. However, just as things seemed to be flourishing, Claire started to sense a shift in the atmosphere around her. Occasionally, during workshops, she would catch glimpses of fleeting shadows at the periphery of her vision. It was as if the spirits she had once freed were now watching her, their presence both comforting and unsettling. One evening, while reviewing notes from the latest workshop, Claire felt a sudden chill in the room. She looked up and saw a flicker of movement in the corner, a shadow that seemed to linger just out of sight. Heart racing, she reminded herself of her newfound strength. She had faced darkness before, and could do so again. Determined to confront whatever was lurking, Claire closed her eyes and focused on her breath, grounding herself. "If there are any spirits here, I welcome you," she said softly, her voice steady. "You are safe. This is a space of healing." As if in response, the shadow flickered again, and Claire felt a rush of energy enveloping her. She opened her eyes to see a figure stepping out of the darkness. It was Annabelle, her face illuminated with a soft glow. "You've done well, Claire," Annabelle spoke, her voice like a gentle breeze. "You are creating a safe haven for others, just as you wished. But remember, healing is an ongoing journey, and you must continue to protect this space." Claire's heart swelled with emotion. "I can feel your presence, Annabelle. It gives me strength, but I worry about the shadows. They seem to linger even now." "Some shadows will always exist, but you have the power to face them," Annabelle reassured her. "Keep sharing your light, and those who seek solace will find it." With Annabelle's words echoing in her mind, Claire felt a renewed sense of purpose. She would continue her mission, providing a sanctuary for healing and growth. But she also understood that with this path came challenges, facing the shadows that would inevitably arise. The following weeks were filled with workshops and writing sessions, but Claire remained vigilant, ready to confront any lingering darkness. She incorporated discussions about fear and resilience into the sessions, encouraging participants to explore their shadows rather than shy away from them. One evening, after a particularly powerful workshop, Claire received an unexpected call from Lydia. "Claire, I need to talk to you. I've been having strange dreams about the asylum." Claire's heart raced. "What do you mean? What kind of dreams?" "Dreams of being trapped, of shadows lurking in the corners. I feel like it's connected to the stories we've been sharing," Lydia confessed, her voice trembling. "It's as if the darkness is trying to creep back in." Claire felt a chill run down her spine, recognizing the potential danger. "Let's meet and talk about it. We'll figure this out together." That night, they gathered in Claire's apartment, candles flickering softly as they discussed Lydia's dreams. The atmosphere was thick with tension, but Claire felt a determination to confront the shadows, just as they had done in the asylum. "Maybe we should hold a special session," Claire suggested. "A gathering focused on facing our fears directly. We can invite those who have been struggling. It might help us all." Lydia nodded, her eyes reflecting a mixture of fear and hope. "Yes, let's do it. We need to show everyone that we're stronger together." Together, they planned the session, knowing that it would not only be an opportunity for healing, but also a chance to confront the darkness that had begun to seep back into their lives. As the date approached, Claire felt a sense of foreboding mixed with excitement. This was their chance to reclaim their power. The day of the special session arrived, and Claire and Lydia felt a mix of anticipation and anxiety. They transformed the community center into a sanctuary, a cozy space filled with soft cushions, warm blankets, and candles casting a gentle glow. As participants began to arrive, Claire greeted each one with a smile, reassuring them that they were entering a safe environment to share and confront their fears. "Thank you all for being here," Claire began, her voice calm yet powerful. "Today is about facing our shadows together. It's a space where we can be vulnerable, support one another, and find strength in our shared experiences." The room felt charged with emotion as participants settled into their seats. Claire introduced the theme of the session, confronting our shadows. She encouraged everyone to share their fears, whether they were rooted in past traumas or current anxieties. As the session progressed, stories emerged, some filled with sorrow, others with hope. One participant spoke of a childhood filled with neglect. Another shared experiences of loss and grief. Claire listened intently, providing encouragement and validation as they opened up. When it was Lydia's turn, she took a deep breath. "I've been having these dreams about the asylum. They feel so real, like I'm trapped in that darkness again." Her voice trembled, but she pressed on. "In my dreams, I see the shadows coming back, and it terrifies me. I don't want to go back to that place." Claire felt her heart ache for Lydia, understanding the weight of those words. "You are not alone in this, Lydia. We've faced the darkness before, and we can do it again. Let's channel that fear into something powerful." They decided to lead a collective visualization exercise, guiding everyone through a meditative journey. "Close your eyes," Claire instructed gently. "Picture yourself standing at the edge of a dark forest, the place where your fears reside. Take a deep breath and feel the strength within you." As the group inhaled and exhaled together, Claire could sense the energy shifting. She felt Annabelle's presence, a reassuring whisper reminding her that they had the power to confront their fears. "Now, visualize stepping into that darkness," Claire continued. "Imagine yourself facing whatever lurks there. You are not just facing it alone. We are all here with you, holding your light." The participants began to share their visualizations. Some described standing firm against their fears, while others spoke of discovering hidden strength within themselves. The atmosphere was charged with healing energy as they collectively battled the shadows that had haunted them. But as the session reached its peak, Claire felt a sudden shift in the air. The shadows in the corners of the room thickened, swirling ominously. Her heart raced. She recognized this sensation from her past encounters. It was as if Dr. Crane's darkness had returned, seeking to reclaim the space they had fought so hard to protect. Lydia, sensing the change, looked at Claire with wide eyes. "Do you feel that?" "Yes," Claire replied, determination coursing through her. "But we won't let it win. We've come too far." Drawing on the energy in the room, Claire called out, "We stand united against the darkness. No more fear. No more shadows." Suddenly, the room erupted with energy as each participant echoed her words, their voices creating a powerful chorus of defiance. No more fear, no more shadows. The shadows trembled, flickering as if caught in a storm. Claire felt the warmth of Annabelle's spirit enveloping her, bolstering her courage. "This is our space," she shouted, her voice unwavering. "We claim it back." With one final surge of energy, the collective voices of the group formed a shield, pushing back against the darkness that threatened to engulf them. The shadows shrieked, their sound a cacophony of despair, before dissipating into the corners of the room, leaving behind a vibrant, glowing light. As the atmosphere shifted back to calm, the participants opened their eyes, stunned by what they had just experienced. Claire felt a rush of relief and joy wash over her, knowing they had not only faced their fears, but had also reclaimed their power as a community. In the aftermath of the session, the group remained, exchanging stories and reflecting on the experience. There was laughter mingled with tears, a sense of unity that enveloped them all. Lydia hugged Claire tightly, overwhelmed with gratitude. "We did it. I can't believe we actually faced the darkness together." Claire smiled, her heart swelling with pride for everyone who had shared their vulnerabilities. "This is just the beginning. We have the power to continue supporting each other. Together we can create a safe haven for anyone who needs it." Inspired by the success of the session, they discussed ways to expand their workshops, offering support groups, art therapy sessions, and even community outreach programs for those who couldn't attend in person. Claire realized that this was more than just a project. It was a movement towards healing and resilience. As they made plans, Claire took a moment to step outside for fresh air. The cool night breeze wrapped around her, bringing a sense of clarity. She looked up at the stars, feeling grateful for the journey she had taken and the friends she had made along the way. Suddenly, a familiar chill raced down her spine, and Claire turned. There, standing at the edge of the light, was Annabelle, her ethereal form glowing softly. "You have created something beautiful, Claire. Continue to share your light, for it brings hope to others." "I couldn't have done it without you," Claire replied, tears brimming in her eyes. "You showed me the way. Thank you for guiding me." With a warm smile, Annabelle nodded. "Remember, every story has the power to heal. Continue to share yours." As Annabelle began to fade into the night, Claire felt a surge of determination. She would honor Annabelle's legacy and the spirits of St. Augustine by creating a place where everyone could confront their fears and find healing together. Emboldened by the success of this special session, Claire and Lydia dedicated themselves to expanding their outreach efforts. They established a name for their initiative, the Sanctuary of Shadows, a space where individuals could confront their fears and embrace healing together. Their first step was to design a comprehensive schedule of workshops that included topics like healing through art, mindfulness in darkness, and the power of storytelling. They reached out to local artists, therapists, and writers, inviting them to collaborate. Many were eager to contribute, inspired by the mission to support those struggling with mental health issues. The sanctuary quickly became a hub of creativity and resilience, drawing in participants from various backgrounds, each with their own unique stories and experiences. Claire organized monthly events featuring guest speakers who shared their journeys of overcoming fear and trauma. During one event, a local artist demonstrated how to express emotions through painting. Participants painted their fears onto canvases, creating a visual representation of their struggles. The atmosphere was charged with creativity, as each brushstroke became a cathartic release, transforming pain into art dye. Lydia facilitated mindfulness sessions, teaching participants breathing techniques and grounding exercises. She encouraged everyone to connect with their inner selves, guiding them to visualize a safe space where they could retreat when fears felt overwhelming. These sessions became immensely popular, helping many find peace amid chaos. One night, during a particularly emotional workshop, a participant named Marcus, who had been grappling with severe anxiety, shared how he had avoided social situations for years. "I always feel like the shadows are watching me," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's as if I can never escape them." Claire approached Marcus with empathy. "You're not alone in feeling that way. We've all faced our own shadows here. Let's take this moment to confront them together." With a gentle nod, Claire led a group exercise, inviting everyone to close their eyes and visualize their fears. "Imagine those shadows as figures you can talk to," she instructed. "What would you say to them? How can you reclaim your power?" As the room fell into silence, Claire could feel a collective energy shifting. When participants opened their eyes, they shared powerful reflections. Marcus spoke of how he saw his shadows as reflections of past experiences, but now he felt empowered to confront them, rather than hide. The discussion turned into a profound exchange of support, with participants offering each other encouragement and advice. As the weeks progressed, however, Claire began to notice something unsettling. The shadows that had once dissipated seemed to linger at the edges of their gatherings. Occasionally, she would catch a glimpse of something dark lurking just beyond the light, reminiscent of the haunting presence of Dr. Crane. During one evening session, as Claire guided participants through a mindfulness exercise, a sudden chill swept through the room. It was palpable, a tangible darkness that sent shivers down her spine. The lights flickered momentarily, and the atmosphere thickened with tension. Claire's heart raced, recalling the feeling of being trapped in the asylum. "Everyone, focus on your breath," she instructed, her voice steady despite her unease. "Remember that we are safe here, together." But as the session progressed, Claire felt an unsettling energy emanating from one of the participants. A woman named Sarah. Sarah had been quiet during the workshops, but tonight she appeared visibly shaken. Her eyes darted around the room, and she whispered frantically to the person next to her. After the session, Claire approached Sarah. "Are you okay? You seemed uncomfortable tonight." "I don't know," Sarah replied, her voice trembling. "I felt something dark. I thought I was imagining it, but it felt so real." Claire exchanged worried glances with Lydia. The shadows were returning, and they knew they had to address it before it affected the entire sanctuary. Determined to confront the darkness head-on, Claire and Lydia organized an emergency gathering, inviting all participants to discuss the unsettling experiences they had been feeling. The atmosphere was thick with apprehension as people arrived, whispers of anxiety and uncertainty floating in the air. Claire opened the meeting, her voice firm yet inviting. "Thank you all for coming on short notice. I understand many of us have felt a presence lately, something that feels unsettling. I want you to know that we are here to face it together." As participants shared their experiences, the room filled with fear and uncertainty. Marcus spoke of a suffocating feeling that crept in during his mindfulness sessions. Others recounted shadows flickering at the corners of their vision, or chilling whispers in the silence. Lydia encouraged everyone to speak openly about their fears. "We have faced darkness before, and we can do it again. Let's take this moment to reclaim our space and confront whatever is lingering." Drawing on the strength of the group, Claire led them through a grounding exercise, reminding everyone of their collective power. "Let's visualize the sanctuary as a fortress, a safe haven where light exists. Together we can cast out any darkness that threatens us." As they closed their eyes and focused on their breaths, Claire felt the energy in the room shift. They began to chant affirmations, words of strength, courage, and unity. With each repetition, Claire could sense the shadows wavering at the edges, struggling against the growing light. Suddenly, a dark figure emerged from the depths of the room. Claire's heart raced as she recognized the form of Dr. Crane, his malevolent presence tangible and suffocating. The participants gasped, fear coursing through the air. But instead of backing down, Claire stepped forward, her voice resolute. "You are not welcome here, Dr. Crane. This is a space of healing, and we will not let your darkness prevail." As she spoke, the group rallied behind her, their voices growing louder, stronger. Together, they chanted in unison, creating a barrier of light against the darkness. The figure of Dr. Crane flickered, his expression twisted in rage and despair, before dissolving into the shadows. With the darkness expelled, the room erupted into applause and cheers, the tension melting away into relief. Claire felt tears of joy stream down her face, knowing they had faced their fears and reclaimed their sanctuary together. As the participants embraced one another, Claire turned to Lydia, a sense of triumph washing over her. "We did it. We stood our ground and sent that darkness away." Lydia smiled, her eyes glistening with tears. "This is a testament to the strength we have when we come together. We must continue to support each other." In the days that followed, Claire and Lydia worked to reinforce the sanctuary's purpose. They created a fear jar where participants could anonymously submit their fears, which they would collectively address in future sessions. They emphasized the importance of open communication and honesty about their experiences, fostering a culture of support and understanding. As they moved forward, Claire felt more confident than ever. She had transformed her fear into a powerful force for healing and connection. The shadows that once haunted her became a part of her story, reminding her of the resilience that lay within. With every workshop, every shared story, Claire and Lydia were building a community that thrived in the light of their shared experiences. A community that embraced both the shadows and the light, finding strength in their unity.